I'm Julia.
Giovanni, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
We are starting with our last panel today. We will be, during this panel, we wanted to build some connections between various ideas, thoughts, and proposals that emerge in the degrowth movement and try to explore in which ways they can be brought closer to policy sphere. Either at European level or at national level. Our composition today of the panel is we have many distinguished speakers coming from European Parliament, national parliaments, but also from universities and trade unions. So the main idea of this conversation would be to see how we can just translate this discussion into policies and measures that could be implemented, and also how we can use diversity that is existing in degrowth universe or universes or pluriverses, if you want, in order to bring them to policy sphere, either or on European or national level. I would like to, without further ado, we have a limited time due to other plans and obligations. It is my great pleasure that I can welcome our keynote speaker at this panel, who will make introductory speech before we continue with conversation. Mr. Philip Lamberts, who is co-president of the Green Group in the European Parliament, and also, very importantly, organizer of the Beyond the Growth conference that was organized a couple of months ago in May in Brussels, and was a very successful gathering at institutional level. We know that this is not only European, it's international conference, but we also see that it's very important to speak about European Green Deal not only from Eurocentric perspective, but also take it in the larger picture of how it also, what impact it makes globally. So without further ado, I would like to invite you to take the floor. And the...
Shall I take the please, or is there a microphone?
Yeah, it will be here.
Let me take this one. Well, good evening, everyone. So I guess these are really the diehards, right? It's 6:30 and you're still in the room. So I'll try to to be to the point. So first, I was not the organizer. I was the initiator of this thing. The organizer is in the room, François and many others. I was putting political capital in it to make it happen, but in terms of really organizing the hard work, it's not me who did it. I was more the sales rep, you know. But what I'm not is the sales rep of the European Green Deal, because the starting question is the European Green Deal really the beginning of degrowth policies at European level? And the answer is no, of course not. Of course not. The degrowth agenda, especially if you use degrowth as a key term, I wouldn't say it has no majority in the European Parliament. It is a tiny minority of the European Parliament or within the member states that carries that agenda. So no, the European Green Deal is not that, and so you should not mistake it for what it is not. Yet, it is more than a climate strategy. If you look at the European Green Deal communication, that is the paper that was released in December 2019, it's a pretty complete inventory of what needs to change if we want to have our societies fit within the planetary boundaries. So that is pretty complete as a vision. Now, if you look at the output in terms of legislation, there it is pretty much climate focused and only climate focused. And the best proof is that when, as part of the Green Deal, we start touching on topics that are not directly climate related or indirectly climate related, witness the fight around the nature restoration law about reducing usage of pesticides, etc. There you can see that we are hitting a wall there, and I would say that indeed we're I'll quote my colleague Manfred Weber, head of the European People's Party group, so the biggest grouping in the European Parliament, from which President von der Leyen, the President of the Commission, stems. He says, okay, Philippe, we could accept that we need climate action, but don't come with your biodiversity and resources thing. Come on, we've already accepted enough. You know, it's already hard enough for companies to make a living. Yeah, look at the profits of the companies and you'll see how hard the living is, making a living is. But so you won't have us for furthering the agenda. So that's a bit the first limitation that we have. It is pretty much a climate-related agenda in terms of real action. But again, let's take it, because if you look at Jean-Claude Juncker, the predecessor of Ursula von der Leyen, he couldn't care less about climate, even climate. So it's already a progress. Now, if you look at it from a degrowth perspective, it's very clear. Ursula von der Leyen announced that as our new growth strategy. So yes, as it is indicated in the summary of the exchange that we are going to have, yes, this is predicated on green growth. Yes, absolutely. But again, if you look at the communication, the implications for policy making, if you take that communication seriously, it's less clear that it is a green growth agenda. If you follow the logic of it, it will lead to a necessary shrinking, at least a material shrinking of our economy. But of course, no one will admit that, which is why basically we as Greens have supported the agenda, saying, well, once they put a finger in it, they will put a hand in it, and then the whole arm will come with it, and at the end of the day, we might see a more coherent policy making around going beyond growth, and that is the way I like to present it, if you want really to enlist larger support, ensuring prosperity within planetary boundaries, because this is what we want to achieve, actually. And so let's say it. Let's say that this is the goal, achieving a good life for everyone within planetary boundaries. This is what we really try to achieve. When I read the mission brief of this talk, another limitation that is mentioned is it doesn't take the social aspect into consideration. There, I might say that, yeah, but that is just the production, well, the logical result of the European Union institutional setup. That is that everything that is related to reducing income inequality or ensuring more equal rights is predominantly national competence. That doesn't mean that the European Union cannot do anything about this, But actually, we are talking about taxation policy, we are talking about social security, we are talking about labor market organization, we are talking about all sorts of regulation, which are pretty much still member state responsibility. And so, you know, some people said, well, we need to have a very strong climate social fund to compensate for increased energy prices that will come with the green transition, at least in the short term. But whatever can be done at European level in that field will be a drop in the ocean, because the bulk of the money that is related to redistribution remains national. Don't forget, the European budget is 1% of Europe's GDP. 1, right? 1. Not more than 1. And so you cannot really perform massive redistribution from the European level unless we usurp power. That is, we send the tanks of the EU in the 27 capitals, we seize the treasuries, and we say now it's going to be superstate Brussels who is going to do it. But this is not really the ambition. I'm still a Democrat. And this leads me to a third shortcoming that is mentioned in my brief, and that is it would be undemocratic because it's top-down. Well, you know, policy making, well, I aspire to a more participative democracy, but yes, by definition, policy making, law making is something that is done by a limited number of people and then applicable to the entire society. That's the whole idea of representative democracy. But I will not agree with those who say that if it comes from the European level, then it is per definition non-democratic. I don't agree with that. Because, you know, I might even make the point that it is more democratic than at national level. Because what happens at national level, and Manon is there, she's from France, she knows it. In most member states, the government writes the law. You might say, yeah, but that's the executive branch. The executive branch should leave lawmaking to lawmakers, right, to the legislative branch. But you know it's not true. That actually the power is concentrated into the hands of the government. And the majority MPs vote as instructed. Right? Not so at the European level, because the only thing the Commission can make is a proposal. And then it needs to find a majority in both Parliament and Council. Now you might say, okay, the Council, that's member states, that's governments, and they are not really accountable. Again, you decide whether you have majorities in parliaments that are just saying doing as instructed. You might say that governments get away with whatever they like. In France, it's even easier because it's a monarchy, so it's just one person. It's easier to know who is really in charge. But in most member states, it's, say, representative democracy with coalition governments. They need to take responsibility for when they say yes or no to or amend EU legislation. And you need to find a majority in the European Parliament. And there, you know, as a professional politician for the last 14 years, I have only sat in the European Parliament, and I will hotly contest the idea that, you know, we members of the European Parliament will be a lesser species of representatives. It's the same voters who elect me and who elect the national MPs, who elect the municipal councils and all the rest of it. I do not see why a legislation adopted with majority in the European Parliament would be less democratic. You might argue that some member states are overrepresented, that we don't have a totally equal representation of European citizens. That's true. A Maltese citizen is overrepresented and a German citizen is underrepresented. But by and large, well, when you look at the big numbers, we are divided in political families, and when there's a majority, usually it corresponds to a majority at least of the express votes by citizens. So I will not agree with the idea that this is undemocratic. But then again, we have to make our case, and there I'm going more to the substance of it. If we want to achieve prosperity for everyone within planetary boundaries, we are talking about system change, not about tweaking the system at the edges, right? And the thing is that people, in their majority, don't want change. One of the main reasons, I might argue, why Greens have not become a mainstream party is because, well, people know pretty much that if you vote Green, you're in for, normally when Greens do their job correctly, you're in for substantial change. And so, better not. This is one of the reasons why people vote more for the Greens at the European level, because they think, yeah, but there they can't harm me too much. You know, they won't do the pension stuff, the labor market stuff, etc. So we can vote for them at European level because it's not harmful. But actually, well, a lot of legislation gets done at European level. So we really, this is, I would say, I won't say it's a culture war because I would avoid that kind of language, but it's really a battle about winning hearts and minds, because no, I'm not like others, an advocate of the Grand Soir and the revolution. I'm a Democrat, and if we want to achieve a system change by democratic means, that's not easy to do. We need to find majorities, you know, and I will finish there. I have often discussions with Ursula von der Leyen, who is Commission President, and arguably the person who launched the European Green Deal. She was not asked, when she was designated by the heads of states and government as candidate Commission President, they didn't give her the mandate of making a European Green Deal, believe me. They didn't want it. And when the Parliament voted for her, the Parliament did not ask her to do a European Green Deal. It was pretty much her initiative. And I remember an occasion where it was a lot of young people confronting her, saying this is not going far enough, this is not enough of a system change, etc. Instead of saying, no, no, you don't understand, actually I'm doing the job, her answer was, well, actually, you're right, but we need to find majorities for that. And that's easier said than done. Thank you.
Thank you. We continue with contribution from Manon Aubry. She's MEP from the Left Group in the European Parliament. Unfortunately, was not able to join us here in person, but still, Manon, the floor is yours, as we agreed. Around 10 minutes. Thank you. Sorry.
She muted herself.
Sorry. Does the sound work now?
Yes, we hear you. We hear
All
you.
right. All right. Now it's gonna work. Yeah, sorry.
You are again muted. Sorry.
It looks like I'm being muted automatically. I don't know if it's Ursula von der Leyen who doesn't want us to speak about degrowth. You hear me now, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's hope it's gonna keep working.
It works. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Feel free to interrupt me if there's any problem with the sound. Well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me. And as I was saying, very sorry not being there physically with you all. I could not make it back and forth, but I really wanted still to be able to take the floor here. I think it's a nice follow-up of the events that indeed we organize in the European Parliament. I guess some of you here in the room might have been there back in May when we organized the event. I think it was a great success and a sort of a milestone. Philippe obviously took a leading role on that, and I thank him again. But it's not often in the EU institution that the growth narrative is being challenged and that alternative to growth are being discussed. And I think that's what we're doing also today, and that's why it's so important. But it also shows that the lines are moving. At the time, you know, we were very crazy economist people talking about alternative to growth. And now it's gaining some traction, credibility, and momentum. We're far from where we should be, also given the climate emergency, but I think there's some progress. And if I start tackling the entry points that you gave us on the European Green Deal, you know, on paper, one can say that it's a great progress. For once, you know, the European Commission is talking about, is having like a sort of a transversal roadmap on climate issues with the objective to achieve climate neutrality. But, you know, one has to go behind what could be laudable objective or communications, because it is mainly and up to date, you know, keeping the same recipes. So there might be some progress there and there, but it's mostly using the same old-fashioned recipes, and you know, continuation of the same with a bit of green painting. And if I just take a few examples, we might have a Green Deal, but we still have free trade policies. In less than 2 months, we're going to vote on a trade agreement with New Zealand, that is the first producer of milk, for example. So what's the sense of bringing milk from the other side of the world? Why we are not, we're already producing too much milk within the EU borders. It's keeping the same old budgetary framework. Of course, there will be a review in the next few months, but keeping the same objective in terms of growth, keeping the same objective with the 3% deficit rule and the 60% debt rule. So absolutely no U-turn questioning those rules that have been suspended and that led to the economic situation in which the EU is currently. The same goes for EU state aid rules, where there's no ecological nor social conditions on the money that is being handed out by states to big companies. You know, I could keep going on with what has not changed in the EU current policies, being the EU competition policy that clearly hinders the public provisions of goods, or in general the market mechanism such as the carbon market, you know, giving a price to pollution that have totally failed in the last few years and have no chance to deliver. And the same old-fashioned rules, the same old-fashioned policies and dogma are being kept with a bit of green painting. And this is what the Green Deal is about for now, because I mean, by we, I say the EU, of course, this is not what I'm advocating as, and the left group in the European Parliament is advocating, but the key question behind this is whether the EU is able to tackle the heart of the problem. That is, and we should name it, the capitalist, productivist, and growth-based economic system. You know, the EU as a whole directory general on growth, and growth is named very clearly in all of the Green Deal policies. And because the Green Deal is seen in a way as a new strategy for growth. That's, you know, they did not even escape saying that. It was the clear objective when they presented the Green Deal a few years ago, because from the start, growth is sort of entrenched in EU institution, and economic growth is the cornerstone of all EU plans and policies. It is at the same time the cure and the objective, sort of the silver bullet that, you know, we have the objective, which is growth, you know, being also in monetary policies, etc., not only in strict economic or green policies. And this is obviously hugely problematic, because this is very far, very distant from what science says, that basically infinite growth is not possible on a planet that is finite and that has limits. And it is also obviously not desirable, because growing the cake forever is probably not necessary if you share it correctly. And quite ironically, pro-growth and neoliberal policies that are so very well still mainstream in the EU are all implemented in the name of, you know, the so-called, that we hear, reality and pragmatism, but they're completely out of touch with ecological and social reality. So for me, the key question for us is, how do we start that radical shift that is needed which means that we should transform both our production and consumption patterns. And there, for sure, it should go beyond, way beyond slogans or buzzwords that the EU is using so many times. And for that, we need to be able to tackle both inequalities and climate change at the same time. And that's where a post-growth economy, I think, is very useful, because it does deal with the essential needs of the population. Instead of producing just for the sake of producing, instead of producing because it does create value for the market or just a handful of rich individuals. And this is what we are calling for as the post-growth economy, that it means that policies should not be assessed anymore in terms of their contribution to growth, which still nowadays are absolutely all EU policies. They should no longer rely on the existence of economic growth, but this is not the direction that the EU is taken. And if you take them, just a few of them of how it could look like. For example, since we're revising the growth and economy, the Growth and Stability Pact at EU level and the budgetary rules, they should incentivize and accelerate the transition. They should be guided by new indicators. Those are part of the proposals that we are putting forward. We should have an emphasis on sufficiency, meaning that we should have an absolute reduction of GHG emissions, and also resource consumption. All of this is also questions of methods, and this is why it should also include democratic planifications, include citizens, include NGOs, include associations in designing those policies. And as I said earlier, those policies will never be accepted if they are not fair. Philippe mentioned the context of France earlier. You know, the carbon tax in France has triggered a huge social movements with the yellow vest movement, precisely because the question of who's paying the bill, who has the capacity to finance this, and what are such social justice at the core of it, was completely out of the picture when they designed this policy. And this is why green transition and fair transition go hand in hand. And in investing, states should also use, you know, that levy to ensure that all green investment also social and fair, and that we use public money for the green transition, but not to recreate an economy in which there's absolutely no economic conditions. And of course, for that, we'll need some new economic resources, and that brings to the whole discussion on, you know, the financial transaction tax and so on that we've been advocating for. Just in conclusion, I think it's interesting if you look backwards, because there've been breaches in the discourse. At least I remember in the conference, and Philippe probably remembers as well, that, you know, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, saying the growth model is obsolete. Well, it's been a time that we've been thinking a little bit on our own, saying that with a few others MEPs, but the reality is that there's been no concrete change in policies, and we might have won parts of the cultural battle, but we still have not won on the political battle. And I even see a bigger danger, because, you know, Emmanuel Macron, for example, has been speaking about a break on environmental policies at European level. We can see that this is a big offensive from the right wing against ecological policies, etc. And there's a big risk of sort of progress in the discourse, but moving backwards in sense of policies. And that's really why I identify as the biggest challenge for the coming months and years, especially as we are going up to the European election, where it's going to be, I think, a big issue for discussion and a big issue as well. Of course, change will need to be taking place in the European Parliament, but I do believe that if we want, at the end, if we want to win the political battle, it needs also to take place outside of the European Parliament, outside of where policies are actually voted, but there needs to be a more of a society movement that will start first and foremost from the outside of the political institution, and progressively it needs to enter by the big door the European institution, and that's what we're trying to do with being the sort of the bridge between that EU bubble and institution that sometimes might feel disconnected, and the reality of the social movements that are already designing that post-growth society and economy that we're advocating for. Thanks very much. I hope I did respect the 10 minutes. And I will stay connected.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will continue with our panel speakers. I would like to invite Giovanni Allegretti from University of Coimbra, who is also doing extensive research on deliberative aspects of the European Green Deal, to intervene.
Thank you very much. Please tell me when I have 2 minutes left, so if I have something more important than the other things, I will wrap up around them. Thank you very much for the invitation. I have been learning a lot in these days. It was very important because I come from other areas, and in this moment, my link with the European Green Deal is mainly to coordinate the project Phoenix, which have 11 pilots at different scales to support the European Green Deal for the next 4 years. And we include in the scale not only Urbanistan, but we have some countries beyond the municipal and regional levels, and one bioregion between Portugal and Spain, where the governance is very fragmented, and we chose to have an area in which some of the governance body are collective onward areas. So citizens themselves, that by the laws of the two countries, maintain a control on the policies that happens on their territory. So it's very complex governance for having the common political commitment to organize a participatory process with citizens. The main problem of the call that I won some years ago was that the process of participation and deliberation were seen as a support to something that already existed, so a sort of top-down object that was requiring a vision of participation as a place for building acceptability of something that it's already clear. Luckily, in this year, the EGD became a little bit less clearer because of polycrisis and because of the environmental backlash that somehow seems to have become a platform of agreement for the future between extreme right and some of the conservatives. The European Green Deal is an object in perennial movement, and so it has to be partially reimagined. It is not so clear. The colleagues before was saying that there is an advancement in the rhetoric and backlash in the action, and it's very important to discuss this gap. Seeing participation as something that must build the main part of policies that cannot work just at political level, because many of the environmental policies do not work if citizens and their behavior will not change. So it's not just the system governed by politics, but also a series of behaviors and habits, which are very important. Many participatory deliberative process we are having are trying to focus on individual citizens, because there is a larger number of citizens that do not believe in mediation, even in social mediation, not just in parties and in trade unions, but also in NGOs, churches, and they think that everybody is trying to say that is representing something. It's like someone that is cheating and doing his own interest using the name of others. So many of these deliberative processes today target what they imagine as a common citizen, if any of these exist. And sometimes they don't know how to solve the relation with what exists already in the territory, which are the struggles organized since a lot of time in the territories, and the different repertoire of struggle. And so now one of the main problem in building participatory and deliberative process is how to make dialogue these two components, the organized society and the individual society not trusting any form of mediation. I think that the solution, as we are trying to work on in our project, is linking to the systemic turn that is happening in participation. Many cities and regions, not only in Europe, also in other continents, are organizing multi-channel system of participation. That means a lot of different channels to discuss issue of society with different actors, but converging and coordinated into a final moment that can include also some elements of co-decision. The importance of this system is that they are not hierarchized, in the sense that they recognize that there are multiple ways of citizens to contribute. We are used to use the ladder of participation of Sherry Arnestein, thinking that participation go from mere information to co-management. But this way is judgmental. Somehow thinks that there are forms of participation which are more important than other. Instead, the system recognizes that each citizen can have a limit in how to participate, and there are different manners of wanting to be part of a change. So the system has in this moment 5 main challenges that I will list here as a bullet points because the time is running. The first one is redefining clearly goals. No? Do we want an organic project to reach a joint vision, or we are just seeking to create a wish list? Because if participation is integrative of representative democracy, I think we have enough wish list produced by politics. Even political programs are in a certain sense wish list, because they list at the same level a lot of different things that are not that are not hierarchized in terms of time. What are more urgent to do soon, and so it's very important that participatory spaces would be in the direction, a way to discuss with society also organic projects. Why is so important to introduce also now some perspective from Degrowth, because Degrowth is not a mechanical application of reduction of growth. It's a challenge to growth. So it's a space for reflecting on how many sectors we have to reduce our fingerprints and how other sectors have to expand. So show balances, capacity of reimagining, reinventing policies of different type. A second area of interest is the need that participatory system could be more intersectional, capable of discussing the overlapping between traditional social vulnerability and racialization, together with environmental vulnerability, which are more linked to places, sometimes to people, even if they have people living in, and co-design with them also the measure for inclusion, because sometimes we don't have enough fantasy to imagine how to attract certain typologies of people in processes. We have to guarantee the quality of deliberation. That means also doing provocation about different point of view. For example, art is helping a lot to include views that imagine the position of other than humans, or future generation, which cannot be there to negotiate with their own voice in the participatory processes. But we need this quality of deliberation to be also careful to power the distribution. In the sense, there have been in a forum of the United Nations 3 years ago a very interesting proposal of some networks of cities to consider participatory budgeting the base for an alliance between between cities in the north and in the south, where cities in the north were reserving a part of their budget to work in the city of the south on measures for climate adaptation and to tackle climate change. The third element is working more about perceptions, perception on centrality of people, perception of self-efficacy, popular control in the phase of implementation, how readiness to change is built for the individual, knowing that others are changing also while we are changing in the participatory process. So we are trying to work on forms of visualization in which you can see how many people change idea on a certain topic from the last meeting to today, in order that we can do a process individually and collectively aligned somehow. Just an example of how much perception are important sometimes to change our language. For example, an eco-linguist has told us, we were discussing, the other day about the word degrowth, no? Why still use it, even knowing that is a barrier to understand it to a lot of people. Yesterday came out a study on New York hospital that tried to transform their food into vegan, and they have a barrier of people that oppose it to that. So they restarted the project, inserting more plant-based products. And the result was that 90% of the people are satisfied, and 36% of the emission has been reduced. And so the result was obtained without the ideological word of vegan that was blocking the change somehow. And I finish with the other two areas, which are discussing incentive and compensation to individual behavior, not just discussing about policies, but how policies can incentivize this, and discussing on how to maintain the follow-up and to monitor by society the political commitment and the adoption of some of the points of the emerging agenda from the participatory process. And I think that that was the main thing I wanted to tell. Asking a final question, because one of the lemma of the EGD is leaving no one and no place behind. And I'm wondering always if it's really true that we don't have to leave anyone behind, because I understand the places, but there are actors that take advantage of the present situation in order to make money and block the change. So I think that we have reflected on how we have to leave this actor behind, even in the policy and participatory processes. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Giovanni.
Sorry for the delay.
Let it be there, yeah. Let it be there, Mike, okay. So now I would like to ask Julia Steinberger, who is coming from University of Lausanne. She's a climate scientist, and I would like to hear more about how you see actually European Green Deal being responsive to climate crisis, to which extent to the urgency, and to which extent structurally. Somebody coming from science, and also very importantly, you are also engaged in the project that actually acknowledges post-growth dimension, where European Commission is supporting this orientation, unlike the ERC grant. So to which extent you see European Green Deal responsive to climate crisis?
Thanks. How many minutes?
5 to 6, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm aware of that's why I also ask everyone to be.
Yeah, no, that's why.
Because then it's unfair to others.
I understand.
Take it as short as you can.
I will
pledge to others.
Thank you so much. No, I just needed to be reminded. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody who's still sitting here. First of all, I am a climate social scientist, right? So not like an actual atmospheric scientist or anything like that. And I guess another thing that I should say is I am not a specialist of specific policies, including the Green Deal itself. So what I have to say is also at a fairly general level. and I wanted to thank Philippe and Manon for basically laying out sort of the lines of argument. I think that they did that very clearly, and it was sort of very enlightening to have those different perspectives. I'd also like to speak on behalf as a Swiss person, and I just want to make everybody aware, a lot of people in this room are from the European Union. I am not sure if you are aware of how terrible my country is. I am not sure if you are aware of how much Switzerland is trying to position itself, despite it being a direct democracy, they're doing it in very untransparent ways, as being a rogue fossil fuel climate destructive state at the heart of Europe. Okay, yeah, he's going yup, so I'm right, apparently. And that so I think you really need to be paying close attention to this, because if Switzerland cares about anything, it cares about its squeaky clean image. And it does not deserve this image in any way whatsoever. So I just really want to focus a minute on this. Switzerland is staying in the Energy Charter Treaty because it is hoping to attract fossil fuel companies to Switzerland to be a headquarter or a postal box in Zug, where we have low corporate taxes, so that those companies can attack the rest of the European Union and stop climate policies. Switzerland is aiming to benefit economically from the destruction of climate policy in the European Union. Switzerland will destroy anything the Green Deal could do. And I think that that's something that we need to take very seriously. Switzerland is also positioning itself through its central bank, which refuses to implement its environmental and social mandate. It's positioning itself through its mega bank UBS, because we now only have one bank ruling the country, to be basically a fossil fuel funder forever and ever. And I think that this is just something that I don't really think the rest of the world is paying enough attention to, because Switzerland cares about what the rest of the world thinks. So please care, and please, I think paying attention to this kind of stuff is really important. This brings us to another aspect of a Green Deal without sufficiency, which is, I don't think that has been mentioned yet, which is the aspect of continuing colonial relations. Part of what Europe is doing through green growth is insisting on having certain types of trade relations. I mean, we just heard Manon talk about New Zealand, and these are trade relations that are detrimental to the countries that are providing the raw materials, and to the people who live there. And I think that without sufficiency, a strong sufficiency aspect, this will not provide security for anybody. This will not provide stable living conditions for anybody. And so that's another aspect that we probably need to, one of the reasons I think that a sufficiency focus is very important. I'd like to take another, I'd like to navigate a middle ground. So yes, science says that we need to reduce resource use. Science says that we very probably need to degrow the economy, because growing the economy and trying to do what we need to do in terms of remaining within planetary boundaries would be unprecedented in reality, right? So if we care about reality, we probably just need to degrow. Okay. Politics cares nothing about that. And I would really like the people in this room, when you're not taking time bashing Switzerland, which you really need to do, to take time to care about that reality. Because we, as climate scientists, inaugurated a sort of climate dialogue with local politicians, and they told us a couple of things that I would really like you to take to heart. The first one is, they said, you have a reality of climate science, that the climate's changing, that it's going to be disastrous, and that we really need to change. And that's nice for you, that you have that reality, but we don't see it, because we only see the reality that citizens see. And you need, if you want that reality to be something that we care about in politics, you need to make citizens see that reality. And my question to this community is, are we doing that? And I don't think we are. I think in this community, we are a little bit self-satisfied of being right about stuff, and we care too little about the rest of the world being aware and changing in consequence. And I think that we need to be a lot self-satisfied, because the reality and being right matters fuck all. And so I think that we need to take this message to heart, and I think that that's why I'm trying to navigate a middle way between Manon and Philippe, who I both appreciate, and I don't want to make enemies, except with the Swiss government. which is that we as a scientific community need to care much more about the reality that the rest of our citizens see and understand. And the IPCC reports, I'm sorry, they're illegible, right? We need to care about that communication. And that's one of the things that the Swiss politicians told us is, your reality needs to be translated to your citizens. And we were like, well, we thought that was your job or the journalist's job. And they're like, well, the journalists aren't doing it, and so I guess it's your job. So it's our job, okay? I'm sorry if we didn't want it, but we're not doing it. We're really shit at it, and we need to change that. The other point that they made really clearly is that we don't care. You come to us and you present policy proposals. And they might be good, they might be bad, but we can't translate them into our political programs because they're value-free. You present us with policy proposals that are value-free, and we're like, oh yeah, well, we thought that was our job. And they're like, no, because we cannot sell value-free proposals. It doesn't matter if we're on the right or the left of the political spectrum. We need to tie policy proposal to social values that our citizens care about. And we were like, oh, well, we thought that was your job. And they were like, no, it's yours. Are we doing that? Are we understanding the values that our citizens have and that we can tie post-growth necessary policy proposals to? And we're not doing it. The other problem we face is, of course, when we do it, we get accused of doing politics, but we all know the answer to that, which is that the status quo is extremely political. If you're supporting the status quo and doing value-free research, you're working for Exxon, BP, and Shell, and that's what most economics departments are doing. So I guess that these are just some of the things I wanted to bring, is that if we want to improve things, if we want to change things, we have to change the way we work. And I'm sorry, but this week I was rather disappointed I did not see enough proposals in that direction.
Thank you. Maybe now the turn to see the trade union perspective with Philippe Pochet from European Trade Union Institute.
Thank you. And I'm also an academic, so it will be a mix of academic and trade unions perspective. But first, I want to start with the title of the workshop, because it's always interesting to see what is the title. And the title is in reality a little bit strange, at least for me. I read, if you remember, that's your workshop you are in, Post-Growth Pluriverse, with S perhaps, in policy sphere, European Green Deal and beyond. Oh. When I saw that, I say, okay, why they want to speak about multiverse, about the string theory, about the quantum stuff, and I say, okay, pluriverse is not multiverse. What is pluriverse? And I will start by the title, and I think that with that I will continue the conversation on how we can engage a dialogue, and why the dialogue is it could be difficult, and to say that one side you have pluriverse, and the other side you have Green Deal, and what it means. And I will try to finish, because that's a veteran you ask us for, with some kind of proposal, because we are all agree that we can have a lot of discourse framing, blah, 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 but what are the concrete proposals that we go beyond, that we know, and what's not a success, because it's not a success. So that's and I will try to really stick to 5 minutes, because it's really, really late. What's then the pluriverse? I think that's the key question, and we had some speaker that speak about, because it's kind of, it's a new paradigm. It's kind of renew world vision. It's something that we are discussing, the place of the human, the non-human, the nature. It's kind of fundamental philosophical change, okay? If we say that's the most important, we know that it takes time. It's not that tomorrow we will move. There was a long discussion between the philosopher about that, but we will not move from one paradigm to another paradigm if we speak about this kind of fundamental change. And I think that's fundamental change. Here, most of the people will agree that this fundamental change has to be done. But when you speak about Green Deal, and I'm a political scientist, what is the Green Deal basically? It's about politics. It's about politics. It's about power, balance of power. It was explained before, and very well explained by Manon and Philippe, is that you have different vision and competing vision, that you have constraint, and that you have a control change. So completely different. So in the title we have really, I think, the two poles of the equation, the radical change and the reality. And then, what is the problem? The problem is not that if even we are moving slowly from the reality to something more radical, is that we have, for me at least, I see the problem because there is no objective way to see, that we have no two more polarized community. And that's the difficulty, because if we agree, and that's also the definition of plurilevel, is kind of dialogue between diversity. So dialogue is important, but we have polarized community. How do you do that? One community, this one will say we go for radical change, and we don't have time, we don't have to go for more radical change. And the other community is, okay, let's go for realistic incremental change. And perhaps some will say no change at all because technology will solve. And the two communities are no, the dialogue is more and more difficult. Once again, no problem if you look the balance of power, we were going in the right direction, or what we think, or I think that was the right direction. But who will bet in this room that the Green parties will win the next election in the European Parliament compared to the extreme right? Nobody, I think, if they are realistic. Nobody will think that's the most probably, unfortunately, they are winning. So we are confronted to this problem, and that's the situation is going to the wrong direction. So I think that we have to change. Or we repeat what we know, and we say we should do that, we should show more graph to be more pedagogical. I think it doesn't work. So I just, let's do some changing perspective. I think that one is non-changing perspective is just transition. From the trade union, so socially. Why just transition doesn't make sense? Because nobody is for an unjust transition. Okay? Nobody will say, I want to have an unjust transition. So if everyone is for the just transition, there is no definition, because there is plenty of point of view of what is a just transition. So we can say perhaps a radical just transition, because radical, you polarize a little bit the term, but just transition is a nonsense, because everyone is for the nonsense. So let's change the perspective and say the environmental question is a social question, but taking the social question seriously. So that's the dialogue that people are doing the environmental study, take care much more about the social and the inequality. And then I go to my first proposal, and then I will go very quick. And then I disagree a little bit with Philippe. It's not very often. I think that we can play a huge role at European level. We can, what is the success of the Social Democrat on the left? It's the welfare state, okay? It's the welfare state. You rightly say we cannot have a full welfare state at European level, but if we say climate change is a new risk, as they had already a small fund about globalization. So it's a new risk, and we have to insure the citizen against this risk, and we will start at European level. And we have a new branch of the social security, that is the climate change. Climate change is a risk, and you have a little bit money. That's clear that you can have enough money at European level. You need much more, but you innovate, and you say, I will insure citizens against this risk, as they do for the minors. Minors, they're 1% of the population, statistical error in the employment rate, but there is no longer a problem in the Polish minor. Why? Because they have guarantee of job, and they will receive money from the European level. So you solve a small problem with money. Let's do that at European level. Secondly, and I finish with that, when we have big conversation, okay, that's a big conversation, that leads to nothing, because that we can continue to debate and we don't have time. Just do practical. Two sectors that we agree are key for the future: housing, retrofitting, and waste and circular economy. So you say, let's have a good success with housing, retrofitting, good job. That's, we have to take care of a lot of migrant worker and working condition. Then you have to rethink partly the city, but have a good example. What is the failure so far is the housing and retrofitting policy. No, let's take that and show that we can have something positive. The second, we say, okay, we have to recycle. We know that the sector had the worst working condition. Let's put the right price to say the worker will have a good working condition. And then you start with some success in sector instead, and then you can move to more complex situation, flight, meat, and stuff that you polarize much more. But at least you have a success to say, we can win and everyone can win. Sorry, it's a little bit more than 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's move now quickly to the national level. We are now in Croatia hosting conference. We have two parties who are in more or less friendly relations, but on the more or less on the same side of the spectrum, less or more radical. I would like to invite Milan Živković from Social Democratic Party first to share with us your views, your personal or your party views. You will tell us on European Green Deal and also on where do you see opportunities for post-growth orientation in the policies in your party, where your party is involved in the policy development or your political imagination of the party.
Thank you for the opportunity to listen to you all. I would like to make 3 brief points. First, any degrowth strategy and climate policy will be successful to the extent it is rooted in the working classes. I refer here to a Marxist structural and ecological sense of the term, where classes are determined by their position in the social process of production. It includes all those deprived of means of life. For instance, those in Global South who cannot, due to environmental degradation and climate change, rely on land and sea anymore to their subsistence. Second, such political agency is justified by manifold reasons. First of all, it is the vast majority of population. It is strategically located at the point of capitalist production and the source of its profits. And because economic insecurity defines working class life, they have a fundamental material interest in transformation into the relations of production and changing the balance of forces. Still, the question of why is the working class so central to the climate struggle remains pertinent. Why cannot we imagine investors or the European Union bringing a meaningful change to bear? Why the hope that changing consumption patterns of professional class will save the day stays so flimsy? To Matthew Huber's list of answers, maybe just provisionally to add that if the climate movement won't speak to the workers' hearts, someone else will. With each election, we see more and more workers support right-wing and very often opposition to climate objectives. If that continues, even some astonishing success of the European Green Deal seem realistic equally as some sort of carbon neutral fascism. To be sure, no redistributional aspect of degrowth can be brought off without, as Karin Doolan said in her beautiful this morning's keynote, those at the margins, both socio-economically and geopolitically. And third, finally, building our hegemonic bloc for degrowth around the working classes is far from an easy task. Much more serious Green New Deal blueprints proposed at their times by Jeremy Corbyn's and Bernie Sanders movements, among others, were electorally defeated. That remind us, again in Matt Huber's words, that the interest of the working class is not pre-given or self-understandable, but must be organized through sustained work of working class institutions like political parties, labor unions, and our own media infrastructure. To conclude, leaning here on Nancy Fraser's matrix of redistribution and recognition. The central question for degrowth policy design, analysis, and political priorities may be, what is the direct contribution to the material well-being and general social position of underserved and misrecognized majority? Thank you.
Thank you. And please, Sandra from Možemo, Green Left Bloc in the National Parliament.
Okay, thank you. Well, first, maybe I should open with a joke. Coming from the country that in the last 15 years had a 0.8% growth on average. So basically, if we would take the degrowth only to the GDP rate, we would actually be coming from, or you would be sitting in the growth country. But that's not a fact, of course. I'm just joking because there is a lot of talk in recent days about the GDP growth in Croatia and what does it mean. It basically means that we have a prime minister which is representing 2.7% growth as a huge economic success. But then when you see what has degrowth and what has really grown in the GDP, you can see that our agriculture has decreased for 10%. You can see that our industry has decreased for almost 3%, and you can see that the financial industry has grown 25%. So yeah, there's the 2.7 there. So, but of course, I will talk much more about what we can really do on the policy level in relation to the degrowth strategies in, I would say, not next years, but maybe next 10 to 12 years on the European and national level. In order to continue, maybe where Mr. Živković stopped, I would like to say, because I discussed it today also with the colleagues from the Greens, that one of the main problems of the Green Deal strategy, but also of the policies and narrative even, that it's being communicated by the Green parties, but also Social Democrats, etc., and even most of the left, is that it's extremely focused on the consumption side of our societies, and that it's extremely focused on an individual. And what is the result of that is that basically it's not only that we have a climate fatigue and that we have people actually taking all the financial, economic, but also emotional burden of being in line with, green transformation, etc. But we also have the fact that most of the people in the society are left out from these policies, because most of the people cannot consume in a way which the green transition would seek from them. And I will give you a very basic example. 3 months ago, my car, not my car, but my husband's car, I don't drive, broke down. He had to buy a new one. We have small kids, we need a car. And of course, we was thinking about buying electric car. We cannot afford electric car. I'm an MP in Croatia, so I'm a higher pay grade in my country. So when we talk about the consumption side, we basically talk about maybe 5 to 7% of people who can basically afford it, who can afford to buy food directly from the producers who produce not maybe ecologically with label, but biodynamic, etc., even better, How many people in your countries can afford that? How many people in our countries, but especially I can say for Croatia, can afford to buy necessary goods in a way that would not involve plastic, which is not recyclable? And how many people can go to work really by using public transportation? In Zagreb, yes, they can. In Zagorje, where I come from originally, they cannot, because there is no public transportation anymore. We used to have it, we don't have it anymore. So basically, the narrative and the policies that we have now, which are not regulating actually the source of the problem, but are regulating the behavior and the choices that people make, are wrong. And they lead nowhere. And they lead to social conflicts, and they lead to what we basically have now, and that is straightening of the right wing, which is saying something that people who cannot afford all of this that we talked about can basically hear and can basically cope with, because they cannot afford alternative that was offered until now, and which I believe we will change. So, very simply, how do we, on the European level or national level, in the campaigns, how can we explain to people that they should ride a bike, not a car, but at the same time that Europe is without any power or any will, for example, to ban flaring and to ban all energy sources coming from the companies which are using flaring. How can we, I mean, how can we really say to people, take a bike, although it's snowing or raining, it's not okay for you to drive a car every day, but yeah, flaring is fine. Flaring is fine. Voluntary flaring, voluntary, we're talking about voluntary flaring. How is it possible that, for example, and this is really from Zagreb city example, I'm also a president, I'm chair of the environmental committee on the national level. So we are introducing all over Croatia new models of disposing waste in the households, and how we basically recycle, and how we need to decrease the mixed waste, and we have to, of course, increase the waste which is being recycled. For example, plastics. And we have introduced it in Zagreb. And the plastics for recycling, which people actually really now separate, has gone up for 20–30%. Yeah? But does Croatia have capacity for recycling plastics? Not really. Yeah? Not only that, but one part of the plastics, at least three types, which we have in our shop or store, etc., are not recyclable. Next three are hardly recyclable, or are recyclable in a way that it costs much more than not to recycle. And then we have three types which are, okay, more or less easily recyclable. So we do all this. We separate waste. Local communities have to invest more in the facilities for separation. They have to invest in biocomposting facilities, which is fine. Of course, we support all that, and we are doing all that. Of course, the prices of waste management are going up for whom? For citizens, but also for local governments. And at the same time, we are doing all that, we are putting more financial pressure on local governments and citizens, but we are not banning these three types of plastics which are coming to the market every day. For some reason, we are not doing that. And how come that anyone can think that it's easier to pressure 500 million people to do the correct thing every day for 25 times and to pay more for doing the right thing than to ban three types of plastics? How come? Yeah? There are things in regulation that can be done, not only if there is a political will. They can be done easily, even technically, even financially. They are not a kind of, a rocket science problem. but for the reason that was actually that was a subject of the previous discussion, for the reason that we really, the politicians, the different political parties, that we really are looking at the political space and the political sphere as a competition only, and as a market where we are answering to the demands of the public instead of seeing us, ourselves, political parties, as organizers around the ideas that we offer, that we are putting on the table, and pushing further for the vision, and steps further, not waiting that somebody says, aha, it's a demand, now we can do the Green Deal, because, yeah, people will support it. We are the ones who have to create the atmosphere where people will support it, but we are the ones who have to make the decisions which will hurt the minority, mostly the rich minority, but that will give us the leverage then to ask more from everybody. But before we do that, we do not have that leverage. And we will be seen as elitist, green elitist, or left elitist, who are talking about the life where we choose the right things, where 95% people cannot choose what we are talking about. So yeah, I will conclude here and we can then discuss.
Thank you. And last but not least, it's my pleasure to invite Mario Monta from European University Institute in Florence to share with us some insights from your research.
Okay, thanks for the invitation. I will expand a bit on things that have been said already and wrap up. So the way I constructed this short talk is to give a short critical assessment of the European Green Deal so far, but also to give some points on a positive note and a bit of a outlook, which I think will not have too much time to expand on. So the European Green Deal, obviously, as this growth strategy, tries to balance between three dimensions, obviously, the economic, environmental, and social. And whilst doing that, it brings along this recognition that it's a balancing act, and with any balancing act, you may create synergies between these dimensions, but also obvious trade-offs. So some of these trade-offs are not reconcilable, others are. So starting from that, the Green Deal was set up as a very ambitious project, but what I took the interest in is observing how the Green Deal takes into account the social dimension, since it has this ambition to take into account also the different social vulnerabilities that are exacerbated by the climate crisis, but also in reaction to the green transition as well. Turns out that the two main mechanisms that the EU has on its disposal, which is on the one hand the Just Transition Fund, and on the other the Social Climate Fund, as Philip has already said, it's only a drop in the ocean. It's really peanuts in terms of finance. Just to give you the exact figures, so the Just Transition Fund is only or merely 1% of EU's total financial budget, including Next Gen EU, for the period of 2021-2027. Same goes for the Social Climate Fund, which is around 3.6, altogether maybe 4.5 to tackle the social consequences of the green transition. I doubt that is not even enough to tackle the specific, very targeted objectives of these two mechanisms, and let alone all the other types of social inequalities that exist, or the costs that are created by the climate crisis. So these two mechanisms are basically they reiterate this very patchworky approach in policy making. There's no comprehensive just transition strategy and insight on the European level, but also surprisingly on the national level, very little is happening in terms of very comprehensive thinking on what the possible relations between the social and environmental are, and how can we actually make sure that we integrate social and environmental objectives in the right way. So the available money will obviously not be sufficient to tackle the burden that is created by things like carbon pricing in households. That will be another burden on the citizens very soon, also in Croatia with higher prices of gas and whatnot. But it's also what is more problematic is that at the EU level we do not have nor the fiscal capacity nor the policy capacity to address all the major inequalities that are created with the green transition. That leads me to the so in this evolution of the Green Deal, I would say there has always been political pushback and backlash for the Green Deal. Also in the beginning, surprisingly, with all the crises that we faced, COVID and energy, some of the ambition has been raised, but by and large, we see in the last, obviously, as we come to the end of the term of the current Commission, a lot of political pushback for the Green Deal, and a greater emphasis on the green tech, clean tech aspects of the business aspect of the green transition, particularly exacerbated by the energy crisis that we faced. But we also see this backlash with how different countries are behaving, like France with unprecedented behavior, opening out portfolios after they've already been negotiated. So with the RED III, but also Germany with this last-minute intervention on saying no, our car industry cannot bear the burden of a combustion engine car ban by 2035. So there is some retreat or stalemate in various policy portfolios at the moment. But what is the most worrying, I'd say, is the fact that right-wing populists are really capitalizing on all of these social vulnerabilities that exist at national levels. You do not have to go far to see that. I mean, those who work and live in the Brussels area, happens all the time, Netherlands as well. Political parties being created as a consequence of that. So the fact that people have to bear the cost of the transition but do not enjoy the benefits of the transition is a major sticking point for right-wing parties, right? Maybe to finish with the recent development, I would say, or the threat that we see, and this is not isolated only in the European Union, but we see that also with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, is the fact that with this need to build capacity both for extracting but also processing critical raw materials, but also a greater emphasis on chips, on semiconductors, etc. It creates this the literature called the green dilemma, obviously, and you can clearly see that in some aspects, some of these new proposals, and I think the Critical Raw Material Act will be on the parliamentary agenda very soon as well. These proposals, they do to a certain extent pitch climate objectives against environmental objectives, and I think we must find ways on how to mitigate this trade-off. Some thinking is out there. We have to, include safeguard mechanisms to disable this quest to El Dorado, but also to ensure that local, voices of local communities and vulnerable groups, especially we see that in Scandinavia with some indigenous groups, their voices have to be heard. This quest for rapid permitting of green infrastructure is really worrisome, and sufficient transparency and accessibility to the public should be preserved. So that's for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you again all for a very rich panel and sharing your insights and positions. What I would gladly like to do now is, of course, to use some of the existing tensions and open questions, but we don't have so much time. I will open floor immediately, particularly as Philip needs to leave for another meeting, so I ask you if you have question for him to use one or two very quick questions, and we can stay 10 or 20 minutes more to continue discussion, but and maybe that you have a closing word or react to each other interventions. So now first I take questions for Philip. Yeah. Who has another mic?
Hi, thank you very much for all of your contributions and this really rich panel. My question to you, Philippe, would be, you ended your talk with the notion that we have to find majorities, and I'm wondering what a key concept or a key notion that builds a narrative where we can build majorities behind could look like. Thank you.
Following from there, my question revolves around how to challenge corporate power, which is upholding the financial and legal architecture of the current system. We've seen a huge rise of corporate capture of international policy-making spaces, the COP, the UN, and the EU. So I'm wondering, how are you resisting corporate power and corporate capture from within policy-making spaces, especially with the rise of this new multi-stakeholder system that is generating this crisis of multilateralism and corporate actors being offered seats at the table to push for false solutions and undermine any attempts at introducing more equitable, sustainable agendas and policies.
Hi, I'm Johnny from Fridays for Future International. Short question. Timmermans left. Basically, now Hoekstra and Šefčovič are now responsible for the Green Deal. So can you maybe share any insights about these two men and how to influence them, as I'm doing activism as a lobbyist?
I'll probably take them in reverse order. Hoekstra is known as a climate ignorant, so I don't count on him to drive a lot. He's coming from Shell, coming from business, as a track record defending corporate interests. So frankly speaking, if you ask, well, I don't know what my group will do, but I think it's quite likely that we are going to oppose his nomination. I think he will still go through, because, well, I don't see a majority against him in the European Parliament. Šefčovič, who was at the Beyond Growth conference in Brussels? The guy had the guts to come. Is, well, von der Leyen as well, but you remember Gentiloni, Dombrovskis preferred a video message. And Dombrovskis, actually, Šefčovič, we worked with him building up the conference. And he was basically our key central contact point in the Commission. And I can feel that he's the kind of guy who is, curious, so open to reality. And the more he gets in, the more he gets open to it. It was interesting that he contacted us the day he was appointed to work together. So to me, is someone who is really opening up to the reality. Corporate capture. I think you said it yourself. Corporates are offered a place in the COP proceedings, in being heard, in policy making. By whom are they offered? By policymakers. So what I mean is that contrary to the United States, where basically they own the system because of the cost of political campaigning, which was decided, by the way, by politicians, it's not the case in Europe. And therefore, corporate capture only happens because politicians want it. So I would say choose the politicians so that they are not politicians who want to give a voice to these corporate interests. It's not that they are capturing us, they are being offered the place at the table. And this is what we should really fight against. What narrative? It's a big question because in the Green family we have been for decades the Cassandra saying, well, doom is coming and we should do something about that. But actually, oftentimes, if doom is coming, you should do something about it. You should change, you know. And that was not the most effective narrative. Now, my political family then said, okay, we need to be solution-oriented, show that there's a way. And yes, we have to be solution-oriented, but we should not ignore, and that is again, to me, a balancing act. We should not ignore two things. One, the gravity of our predicament. And you might say, well, that's not a winning proposal in electoral campaign to basically say we are in a dire situation. But I think that changing reality starts with recognizing the predicament we're in. And we should not underestimate it. But there's a way to present that. But I think that it's by and large accepted that we are driving fast into a hard wall. I think many of our fellow citizens realize that. And the story that you need to tell is, well, we don't have all the solutions, but probably we can trust the collective wisdom of society to find solutions. The second aspect that we should not underestimate, and I liked what you said, I forgot your name, about the conflictuality of all this, because this whole language of, you know, leaving no one behind, I totally agree with you. I hear that most when I go speak with representatives of corporate interest. You should leave no one behind because otherwise you will get the gilets jaunes. And actually they want us to look at those people so that we are not looking at capital owners who stand to lose. I don't want to leave them behind as individuals. But what I want to say is that they cannot, and who said in a previous panel, we should be very clear that the party is over. I mean, those who live from exploitation of the planet and other living beings must realize that this kind of profit that they expect these days are over and should be over. You cannot reconcile the kind of rate of profit that they want and a good life for everyone within planetary boundaries. This is just not possible. And so we should not ignore the conflictuality of all this. So every human being should live a fulfilling life, including those who are now capital owners, but they cannot expect to keep their privileges. This should be over. So that would be just pieces of the narrative. May I finish by saying, Julia, I don't know which kind of politicians you are talking to, but I would not accept that it is not the role of politicians, so it's a double negation, you should never use that, but I will never accept that it's not my responsibility as a politician to translate, to start from reality and translate it into possible policy options. It's not the jobs of citizens. Well, I wouldn't say it's not the job of citizens because every citizen is part of the debate, but I would not accept that politicians can say, well, you know, I'm just there to satisfy interests. No, I expect politicians to have a reading of what reality is and propose a path towards what reality could be. And the debate between those various options is the democratic debate. But I see that as my responsibility. Likewise, I cannot accept that it is not for politicians not to link that to values. That is my job. Well, I don't want to take it from you. I'm just saying that I don't accept politicians just saying, well, you know, this is not my job. It is at the heart of your job. We are not just defenders of vested interest, are we? And if that is what policy making has become, then democracy is really in grave danger. I think it is. But we can still change it. At least in countries such as ours, we are not taking a physical risk, well, in most countries, getting into politics. And I would expect politicians in free countries like ours to behave as a democratic politician should be. Thank you. Sorry, I really need to run.
Thank you for joining. So we had a few hands, but we also had one reaction. Do you want to wait with the reaction? Yeah, okay. So we have two, and did we have it there? Not for the moment.
So we talk about a lot about losing like voters. So I don't know, in Germany, I'm coming from a transformative design perspective. So I've looked the last 3 years into what is transformation strategy. And in Germany, the AfD does a pretty good job in doing transformation design because they actually go from door to door and listen. And I think what green and left-wing parties and so have to start is go from door to door and listen to the people, which is, I think, missing out a lot in those times of big social media campaigns and more information, more information, more information. I think we really have to start again to talk to people instead of just, I don't know, speak over them, without them. So I don't know if it's just in Germany, but if you see the same thing in your countries, maybe you can just, that's my question. Do you see the same thing in other countries?
Thank you. We collect.
Hello. My question goes to Julia Steinberger. I wanted to ask how concretely we could communicate better, or if you have any ideas for this, like for example, make the IPCC report more legible, and if you think that art or what role art could be in this process, or you have other ideas.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, one more. Daniel, yeah. Here. Yeah.
My question has to do with finances and the last two words of the title of the panel, and beyond. And beyond means beyond Europe. And it also has to do with the European Green Deal, and it has to do with something that Julia highlighted at the Beyond Growth conference in Brussels, when Julia highlighted the importance of public ownership and public services. The part about finances has to do with the way public finances are used in the European Green Deal and beyond Europe. For instance, in the Biden's administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, or in the so-called Just Energy Transition Partnership. So it seems that the lack of public finances is not the problem. The problem is that public finances originates in the public, but the way it is implemented and the way it is used is no longer public. So, because basically what it means is that public finances is used to make profitable what otherwise wouldn't be profitable, as we see in the energy sector. So I would like some reflection about the importance of public ownership in this context.
To anyone or particular speaker? To anyone or particular speaker?
Well, Julia already referred to that in Brussels, so if she wants to take that.
I like that look, Julia.
Okay.
But I know what Julia thinks, so I would like to know what the other think.
Okay, if anybody wants to pick that. Sandra, do you want to start?
Yeah, I would first like to just return to this issue of EU and inequalities and how much really EU can do regarding social issues. I think we should, when we talk about the model of the transition which doesn't socialize the costs of the transition on those who are either poor or low-income families, etc., then we should be stop talking about only social mechanisms such as social transfers and subsidies and this and that. But in order to really have the transition, which is also transformative in relation to social inequalities and income inequalities, then it should be built in the design of the transition. And this is why I said the consumption focus is not enough. We should focus on the production and distribution focus. And when we talk about what EU can do about inequalities, it can do a lot. But the problem is that it cannot, of course, intervene maybe into into policy measures such as social transfers, but it can, for example, say that investment in green transition or investment in social inclusion of those who cannot afford, etc., or low-income families, are not being counted into 60% of debt. They can say that. Maybe all green investments that public sphere makes should not be treated as any kind of debt. Maybe investments in education should not, or housing, or maybe that's one way. Maybe the other way is that we say, okay, look, a lot of money, billions, are being taken out of Europe or are being kept in Europe in European safe havens. How do we treat safe havens in Europe? How do we treat them? And how do we use the money that we can collect through the fair taxation on the European level for green transition or for decreasing inequalities? Because the inequalities do not come from, we cannot talk only about inequalities in the national sphere. We have huge regional inequalities in Europe. We have center-periphery different relations, So tackling those inequalities, we are also tackling the mechanisms for inequalities on the national level. So I think there are a lot of mechanisms that could be used in order to do that. For example, I will tell you, we had a national problem here with the energy charter. And we, as a party, we were asking and giving proposals that Croatia pulls out from the energy charter. And then the answers that we were getting is that, okay, when European Union does that, or European Union will maybe transform the energy charter, In the meantime, we as a country have paid few billion kunas, now, okay, let's say a couple $100 million to the company who sue us under the energy charter. Yeah? So, there are a lot of regulative things that can be done easily on the European level, not overstepping the boundaries given by the treaty in order to tackle different level of inequalities, either on the European level, regional level, or then inside the national level. It's the question whether we want that.
Thank you. Giovanni wanted also?
Just quickly to Daniel, one thing that I noticed in the process of called Conference of the Future of Europe, that people have been more sensitive than I could have imagined on the issue related to the beyond Europe. For example, there was one of the sector of discussion that was called Europe in the World. And one of the main critics of citizens, the 800 citizens participating from the different 27 countries, was, first of all, that this conference for 1 year and with 20 million costs have missed completely the candidate countries, for example. So they were talking about the future of Europe without part of the future of Europe. Second, that the Europe in the world is not a sector of discussion, is an implication, often colonials, of all the policies of Europe. And so people said this would have to be treated as a cross-cutting dimension of all our policies. And for example, in the energy discussion in the panel 3 on environment, especially when discussing about the nuclear, came out a discussion on the ambiguities of clean energy. For example, the accumulation system, the batteries, and people asked why sometimes you present clean energies as totally clean when part of their supply chain is depending on a series of issues which are strictly related with the policies in developing country. So I think that in the end, in a process that had the luxury of time, there was the possibility to citizens to address some important issue of the relation between European policies and the beyond Europe places.
Thank you.
Thanks. So there were a couple of questions. In terms of I think the first one, in terms of the AFD and going door to door, so I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world, but I mean, in Switzerland, things are really bad, obviously. But I think that one of the things that I'm starting to realize is that Polanyi was right. So the logical consequence of people being exposed to neoliberal markets is fascism. And we will lose to fascism, and it's going to be even worse than it is now, way worse, if we do not manage to protect people against neoliberal markets. And maybe that's where the public services comes in, is that the way we protect people against neoliberal markets is we take the stuff we need to do for each other out of the market, and we provide it for each other in other ways. And that needs to be our agenda in a very explicit way. I don't know how we sell it, but that's what we need to be doing. Because right now people are suffering, and when they suffer in that way, Polanyi said it very clearly, and he was not wrong. That's what tends to happen. So I think that we should be worried a lot more about the links between economics and fascism and our current direction of travel. In terms of the IPCC and communication, do you have any idea how little the IPCC has as a communication budget? I think it has one person, or possibly not a percentage of a person. It is tiny. We are so outgunned here, like so extremely outgunned. Like you have no concept of how poor the communication potential is of that organization. So we need a lot more resources in general into how we communicate stuff. And I don't even know where that comes from, right? Who is going to do that? The governments, yeah. I don't see Saudi Arabia paying that bill. That's, or the UAE. Yeah, I think that sort of covers it.
Thank you so much, Julia. Just quickly, when we start to talk, which we are not, don't be afraid, about concrete policies, we should talk about working time reduction, really. We should talk about retrofitting houses, as you said. We should talk, but first of all, we should talk about public investments. Very obviously, this change in the modes of production, in the way we produce things, which sort of construction materials for the retrofittings we use, are they sustainable? It will depend by the end of the day on public investment. So we need to talk about abolishing Stability and Growth Pact for the starters. But your intervention was very important. At the same time, we lack capital needed for degrowth transformation, our nation states and European budget is subsidizing profits. And this is definitely a scandal. But I like what you said. I appreciate what you said, comrade from Germany, that we should talk less and sorry. What you said about listening to people, it's very important, and I connect that to what Manon Aubry from France said about parliaments and representative institutions in general, and the mainstream media not being the exclusive field of political work. And when we close ourselves in these fora, then we are recognized by the people as the enemy. And same goes for the so much talk about policy nitty-gritties. People recognize that. Each time we mention that word policy and policy design, people, regular people, they know that there is not anything good for them. And that's how it goes. You know, that French philosopher, that's something for you, Giovanni, Jacques Rancière. He connected, he was very favorable, as you surely know, about participatory democracy, but he connected the policy with the police force, because that's what it is. It's enforcement of certain way of ruling. So let's talk less parliamentary nitty-gritties, less policy talk, more listening to the people.
Thank you, Philippe. So I would like also to invite everyone to have closing words who still didn't take this opportunity. We need to leave the room very soon, as it's already 8 and it's a long day. So please do with 1 or 2 minutes. Yeah.
Just 2 sentences. First, it's not true that EU can do nothing about inequality. We had the directive on minimum wage, and even more important about collective bargaining. They can put social clause in the procurement. They can do a lot. They can have a framework directive for minimum income. So it's the kind of I don't understand why the leftists continue to say something which is not true. I think that's the first. The second thing, and that's an experience that we had at the Institute, we were funded by the Climate Foundation to say, it was 10 years ago, take the IPCC document, try to think what they have social, you cannot invent, and unfortunately 10 years ago very little, and then try to give that to your community, because that's clear, that's something coming from the ETUI, will have more resonance for the trade unions, that's something from IPCC people of green. And I think that's also perhaps the way of translate, that you need to have this kind of very diverse actors able to speak to their community with their language, keeping what is in the report and not in the report. And that could be a strategy, not very expensive.
Thank you.
All right, I have it here. So just shortly on this debate on public finance and the type of financial resources that are mobilized, maybe as a side note, like how do we relate that to actually actual degrowth policies on the social front? It's true that we actually, some of these, if not most of these social investments for a just transition are geared towards perpetuating a extractivist logic. So you're just replacing one extractivist logic of fossil fuels with another extractivist logic of green tech. So that leads us obviously towards the wall at some point, but this path towards realizing that post-growth is the only way to go will be long and bumpy. I don't see it, anytime soon. But the problem with the finance that is available for tackling the social consequences and the challenges of the green transition is that social policy is seen as a productive force that will contribute to more market, to more profit, to more modern green industry, green jobs, etc., etc. Whereas all these elements that you would identify as degrowth policies, as was mentioned just earlier, like income support, universal basic income, or a reduction of working time, and these sort of policies, they are not on the radar and probably will not be at the EU level anytime soon.
Okay, thank you all again for a very rich panel. I'm always surprised how 2 hours seems to be short. We need really to leave this space. This is also the last day in this venue. And I would like to remind you that all those who will join us tomorrow, we join at Centar Mladih Ribnjak, Youth Center Ribnjak. You have it in the maps. So the whole program tomorrow will be transported to that location. Thank you again for your participation and applause.
Thank you. Actually, I know you need to.